Welcome to FX Options University, recorded live at the International Securities Exchange, the world's largest equity options exchange. Join the industry's top trading professionals as they provide insight and strategies for trading in the currency markets using FX options. FX options are a low-risk alternative to hedging currency moves in any market condition.
So obviously, when the stock market was falling, the EUI is going to be rising. Took place in August, September, October. Okay? When the stock market starts to rally, as it's done since the March 9th lows, the EUI started to fall off. So you want to make sure that you're always aware of that correlation. Have that in the back of your mind, but our indicators are telling us where our signals are here. So our indicator, not even paying attention to that resistance level, told us to go ahead and exit the trade there. Then we had another series of short signals that took place based upon our setup and confirmation system. Now, look what's taken place here recently. In particular, this signal, July heading into August. That's a whipsaw, folks. And that happens. You're never going to find the holy grail of trading. Nobody ever has that. You know, people get on streaks. Sometimes those streaks last for extended period of times, but ultimately, you're not going to find the holy grail. However, if you can limit your losses on some trades like this, where, yeah, you might give up some money, you might be whipsawed out. You knew that the market was pretty weak here. You knew the EUI was pretty weak here, but ultimately, you know, your timing was just ultimately off, you know, based upon your indicator. Well, that's fine, because you can always come back to the trade later and have other short opportunities that take place there. So let's take a look at another currency pair here. And look at our personal favorite symbol at BigTrends, the yuck. Some of it is just because of the name, and some of it is because we've had a lot of success trading this particular Japanese yen pair. So once again, have the exact same indicators and the exact same signals on the charts. Starting from the left to the right again, you can see this big segment that takes place here where we have our buy and then ultimately our buy exit. And you might look at it at first glance and say, you know, by the time you get your exit, well, that's back down about where you started. However, you know, the rules that I mentioned just a little bit earlier, if you have rules in place where you tighten your stops or you take profits, you don't have to worry about that as much. The other thing that we're considering here is we're just looking at this particular %R indicator in terms of our signals. So what do you always want to be able to do? You want to be able to refine your signals and be able to improve the signals that you take for any particular trade. Well, if we go down and let's circle really during the same time frame, get my drawing tool here. Let's look at our ADX, the green line that takes place down here. So what you want to have is not just one indicator that you trade off of, but you really want to have other indicators that are complementary that you can layer together to ultimately tighten up the signal. So what I'm talking about is a situation in which, for this first signal, just use it as an example. You want to say, okay, %R is telling me that I'm in a bull confirmed situation. However, if I go down and look at my DMI and ADX, what is it telling me? Well, ADX stalls, reaches a shorter term top, and then starts to roll over. What does that tell you? Remember I said earlier, a rising ADX tells me that it's a strong trend and the trend is still gaining strength, still moving and accelerating in one direction or another. Once that stops happening, I'm done with the trade. You know, yeah, there could be a time where a trend pauses for a little bit and then continues back to the upside, but you know what? I can always get back on board the trade. But I don't want to try to hang on to it too long and then ultimately lose out on my money there. So if you look at when it starts to roll over, it's right around the top of that overall trend that takes place. So what can you do? You can tighten this buy exit signal to a few weeks earlier. You go ahead and be out of the trade by early March there. So don't just rely on one indicator. Don't use too many indicators. As you can see, I really only have 3 on here that I pay attention to. Yeah, I look at the 200-day moving average just to kind of get some idea of where it is, but I don't trade off of it. I don't make entry and exit decisions based upon that. I use my %R indicator, I use my DMI and ADX, and I use my acceleration bands because those indicators complement each other very well. So you want to make sure that you have indicators that work well together and that ultimately tighten down your signals where you're catching, once again, that middle section of the trend. If we draw our lines here and take a look at the trend, you've got your bottom there. You've ultimately got your top that takes place in April, right? Well, what do we just look at? We can catch this section right here. Ultimately, that's the middle section of the trend. That's the sweet spot that we like to look for. When everything comes together, when all of our indicators line up, that's the portion that we want to catch. And you know what? There'll be times where sometimes you'll see the trend continue on without you. That's fine. Don't get frustrated by that. Don't get greedy. Ultimately, if you're frustrated by missing out on some of that, a lot of times it's just strictly based on greed. However, if you look at things here, you had a profitable trade. So if you can do this consistently, you are accurate here in this particular situation. You're able to zoom in and focus, and narrow your focus to really find the sweet spot of that trend. And if you can do that then on a consistent basis, that's what we talked about earlier in terms of being profitable. So lots of good signals, that a fantastic signal there earlier on the yuck. Now, as we really start to take a look at some of the other opportunities, John has a question. How do you know when you reach the 30 and 60% threshold? John, when I'm talking about the 30 and 60%, I'm talking about profitability ultimately in my options trades. So, if you buy a $3 option and then all of a sudden it goes up to $4 in value, well, then you've got a 33% winner that takes place there. So you've reached the 30% threshold, and that's ultimately an area that I like to look to tighten my stop at that point to break even. And then once it goes up to a 60% winner, so that same $3 option that I initially bought, when it goes up to $5, that's a 66% winner, a little over 60. So then from there, you can tighten your stop from break even to a 30% winner. 30% would be at the $4 that we just talked about. So your exit would be at $4. You're currently holding an option that's worth $5. Sometimes you'll get stopped out of the trade, but once again, you're being stopped out at a profitable level. You're not being stopped out for a loss. You're being stopped out for a profit. Think about that. A lot of people try to go for the huge winners and end up giving back profits. You never want to do that. Looking at some of our other signals here on the yuck, if we look at the next few that take place for us, both long and short signals, what happens if we can go straight down from here? Obviously, our %R is going to be on board, right? Because that's what we're getting the signals from at the top. But then if we drill down a little farther, take a look at where our ADX is. It's below that 25 level. So it's not in that sweet spot area that we're looking for. So what do? You pass on these. No, I'm not going to trade that. I'll wait for the next opportunity to come around that really fits the biggest and best trend. Look at the next opportunity here. Does that fit a little bit better? Yeah, actually it does fit a little bit better. Now, you would have been whipsawed out of this trade.
Thank you for participating in this week's session. Please join us again next week. Get trading ideas, exchange rates, webinars, news, and commentary. Visit www.fxoptions.com. ISE FX options can be easily traded through all options-enabled brokerage accounts. These exchange-listed securities are cash-settled in U.S. dollars and have a European-style exercise.